His breath was warm against my neck as his fingers traced the curve of my spine, each touch sending electricity through my skin. "Tell me what Nietzsche really meant," he whispered, his voice rough with something deeper than academic curiosity. I could barely think. Pressed against the bookshelf in his dimly lit office, philosophy texts scattered around us like fallen leaves. "About what?" I managed, my voice catching as his thumb brushed along my collarbone. "About becoming who you are," he murmured, his lips barely grazing my ear. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not with him, not when I had someone waiting at home. But as his hands found my waist, pulling me closer, all rational thought dissolved into pure, desperate need. Loving. The tension already? Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment about what's got you hooked. Let's dive deeper. The philosophy discussion group met every Thursday evening in the basement of the Berkeley Student Center. I'd been coming for 3 months, drawn by heated debates about existentialism and the meaning of life. But if I'm being honest, I was really drawn by him. Luca sat across the circle, dark hair falling into his eyes as he passionately defended Sartre's views on freedom and responsibility. At 32, he was older than most of us, a graduate student working on his dissertation about consciousness and authentic existence. When he spoke, the room fell silent. When he looked at me, my breath caught. Tonight felt different. The usual crowd had dwindled to just 6 of us, and the discussion had grown more intimate, more personal. We were debating Camus and whether life had inherent meaning or if we create our own purpose. "But that's exactly the point," Luca said, leaning forward, his intense gaze finding mine across the circle. "We're thrown into existence without our consent, but we still have the radical freedom to choose how we respond to that absurdity." I shifted in my chair, trying to ignore the way his eyes seemed to see straight through me. Easy words from someone who's never faced real consequences for their choices. I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyebrow arched, a slow smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And what makes you think I haven't?" The air between us crackled with unspoken tension. I was aware of the others in the room, but they felt distant, like background noise. This conversation was happening just between us now, loaded with meaning that had nothing to do with philosophy. Because someone who truly understood existential weight wouldn't speak so casually about freedom, I said, meeting his stare directly. Real choice requires real risk. Interesting. He stood, moving to the whiteboard, but his eyes never left mine. "So you think authentic existence demands we put something on the line? That we can't truly live without the possibility of losing everything?" My pulse quickened. Was he still talking about philosophy? "I think most people are too scared to find out." The room had gone completely quiet. I could feel the other students watching this intellectual tennis match, but all I could focus on was the way Luca's shirt stretched across his shoulders as he wrote on the board, the way his fingers gripped the marker with controlled tension. "What, about you, Hannah?" he asked, turning back to face me. "Are you too scared?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I knew we weren't talking about Camus anymore. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger. David and I had been engaged for 6 months, planning a spring ceremony. Safe, predictable David, who worked in accounting and thought philosophy was pretentious. David, who never looked at me the way Luca was looking at me right now. "I don't know," I whispered, honestly. The discussion group officially ended at 9, but people lingered, continuing conversations in smaller clusters. I gathered my things slowly, hyper-aware of Luca organizing papers at the front of the room. One by one, the others filtered out until it was just us. "You left something on the table," he said quietly. I looked over. My notebook lay open, pages of careful notes about existential philosophy mixed with unconscious doodles, swirling patterns I'd drawn while listening to his voice. "Thanks." I moved to retrieve it, but he was already there, our fingers brushing, as we both reached for the book. The contact sent warmth shooting up my arm. "Hannah." His voice was soft, uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "When you talk about authentic existence, about putting something real on the line, what is it you're really asking?" I stared at him, this man who spent his days thinking about the deepest questions of human existence, and realized he was asking me to be completely honest about what I wanted, about what I was willing to risk. "I'm asking whether it's possible to feel truly alive when you're living someone else's idea of your life," I said finally. His eyes darkened. "And are you? Living someone else's idea?" The question cut straight to my core. David had proposed with his grandmother's ring in front of both our families at Christmas dinner. Everyone had expected it, planned it, celebrated it. I'd said yes, because it was time, because it made sense, because refusing would have required explaining feelings I couldn't even name. "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "I want to show you something." I should have said no. Should have gone home to David, who was probably grading papers and expecting me to curl up beside him on the couch. Instead, I followed Luca out of the building and across campus to his small office in the philosophy department. The space was cramped but warm, books stacked floor to ceiling, papers scattered across every surface. A single desk lamp cast golden light across the chaos of academic life. He moved around the small space with familiar ease, clearing papers from a worn leather chair. "Sit," he said gently. "I want to read you something." I sank into the chair, hyper-aware of how close we were. In the intimate space, he pulled a slim volume from his shelf, Sartre's Being and Nothingness, and flipped to a marked page. "Listen to this," he said, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." He looked up at me, his dark eyes intense in the lamplight. "Do you understand what that means?" "That we can't escape the weight of our choices," I said softly. "More than that." He set the book aside and moved closer, leaning against his desk so he was directly in front of me. "It means that every moment, we're choosing who we become. Right now, in this room, we're both making a choice." My breath caught. The air between us felt charged, electric with possibility and danger. "What choice am I making?" I whispered. Instead of answering, he reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You're choosing whether to stay safe or to find out who you really are." The touch sent fire racing through my veins. I leaned into his palm without thinking, my eyes fluttering closed. When I opened them, he was watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Luca," I breathed. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're with someone else. But Hannah, the way you look at me, the way you challenge everything I say, I can't pretend I don't feel this." His confession hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. Every rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but my body was already leaning toward him, drawn by something deeper than logic. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Being authentic," he said, and then his mouth was on mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, giving me space to pull away. But the moment our lips met, something inside me ignited. I kissed him back with months of suppressed longing, my hands fisting in his shirt as he deepened the connection. He tasted like coffee and possibility, like every conversation we'd never had and every touch we'd imagined. His hands found my waist, pulling me up from the chair until I was pressed against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body through the thin fabric of my dress. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, rapid and unsteady, matching my own racing pulse. "God, Hannah," he murmured against my lips, his voice rough with need. "I've thought about this every Thursday, watching you argue with me, seeing the fire in your eyes." I pulled back enough to look at him, taking in his flushed cheeks and darkened eyes. I thought I was imagining it. The tension between us? Never. His hands slid up my sides, thumbs brushing just beneath my ribs. Every time you challenged me, all I could think about was what it would feel like to kiss that brilliant, stubborn mouth. The confession sent heat pooling low in my stomach. I'd spent so many nights lying next to David thinking about Luca's hands, his voice, the way he looked at me like I was worth understanding completely. "We shouldn't," I whispered even, as my fingers traced the line of his jaw. "No," he agreed, "we shouldn't." But his hands were already moving, finding the hem of my dress, fingers dancing along my thighs with maddening lightness. "But I'm tired of living a safe life, aren't you?" I was. God, I was so tired of being careful, of choosing security over passion, of dimming my own fire to fit into someone else's comfortable world. With Luca, I felt alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "Yes," I breathed, and kissed him again. This time, there was nothing tentative about it. His mouth moved against mine with desperate hunger, his hands gripping my hips as he lifted me onto the edge of his desk. Books and papers scattered to the floor as he settled between my legs, his body pressing against mine with delicious pressure. I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer, needing to feel more of him. My dress had ridden up, and I could feel the heat of his skin through his jeans as he pressed against me. The sensation sent sparks racing through my nervous system. "Is this what you meant about putting something on the line?" I asked breathlessly as his lips traced down my throat. I felt him smile against my skin. "Everything worthwhile requires risk," he murmured, his teeth grazing my collarbone. "The question is whether you think I'm worth it." Instead of answering with words, I reached for the buttons of his shirt, my fingers working them open with trembling urgency. He groaned softly as my hands explored the planes of his chest, his skin warm and smooth beneath my palms. "You're worth everything," I whispered, and meant it. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes searching my face in the golden lamplight. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, we can't go back. I knew he was right. This would change everything. My relationship with David, my sense of who I was, my entire carefully constructed life. But as I looked at this man who saw me completely, who challenged me to be more than I'd ever imagined, I realized I'd already made my choice the moment I followed him here. I'm sure, I said, and pulled his mouth back to mine. What followed was a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about desire. Luca touched me like I was something precious and dangerous, his hands mapping every curve with philosophical precision. He took his time with each button, each piece of fabric, each newly exposed inch of skin, as if he was trying to memorize me. When his fingers found the sensitive spot at the base of my throat, I arched against him with a soft gasp. He paused, watching my reaction with dark, focused eyes. "Tell me what you want," he said quietly. The question caught me off guard. David had never asked what I wanted. He followed a routine that was efficient and predictable, but Luca was looking at me like my answer mattered, like my pleasure was his primary concern. "I want you to touch me like you mean it," I whispered. His eyes flashed with something primal. "I mean everything with you." His hands moved with new purpose then, finding the places that made me gasp and shiver. When his fingers traced along my inner thigh, I thought I might come apart from anticipation alone. He was patient, building tension slowly, watching my face for every reaction. "You're so responsive," he murmured, his thumb brushing against sensitive skin. "I love watching you lose control." I'd never been with someone who paid such careful attention to my body's responses. Every touch was deliberate, designed to push me higher, to make me burn with need. When he finally touched me where I most wanted him to, I cried out softly, my head falling back against the wall. "That's it," he whispered encouragingly. "Let me hear you." His fingers moved with expert precision, finding a rhythm that had me trembling against him. I gripped his shoulders, needing something to anchor me as sensation built in waves. This was nothing like the quick mechanical encounters I was used to. This was worship, attention, complete focus on my pleasure. "Luca," I breathed, feeling the tension coiled tighter in my core. "I know," he said, his voice rough with his own need. "I've got you." He increased the pressure slightly, his fingers moving in circles that had me gasping his name. I could feel myself approaching the edge of something huge, something that would shatter me completely. "Let go," he whispered against my ear. "Trust me." I did. The climax hit me like a philosophical revelation, sudden and all-consuming, rewriting everything I thought I knew about my own body. I trembled against him as waves of pleasure washed through me, his name a prayer on my lips. When I could breathe again, I found him watching me with something like awe. "Beautiful," he murmured, pressing. A soft kiss to my temple, but we weren't finished. I could feel his need pressing against me, hard and urgent, and I wanted to give him the same careful attention he'd given me. I reached for his belt, my fingers working the leather with new confidence. "Your turn," I said, looking directly into his eyes. He helped me free him from his jeans, and I took a moment to appreciate the sight of him. Strong, ready, completely focused on me. When I wrapped my hand around him, he groaned softly, his head falling back in surrender. I'd never particularly enjoyed this aspect of intimacy with David, but something about Luca's responses made me want to explore, to discover what made him lose control the way he'd just made me lose mine. I experimented with pressure and rhythm, watching his face for clues about what he liked. "God, Hannah," he breathed when I found a particularly sensitive spot. "Where did you learn to do that?" "I'm learning right now," I admitted, and his eyes snapped open to look at me with surprise and desire. "You're perfect," he said, his voice strained with pleasure. I continued my exploration, using my mouth and hands to build his tension the way he'd built mine. When I took him deeper, he made a sound that was part groan, part prayer, his fingers tangling in my hair with gentle pressure. "I'm not going to last much longer if you keep doing that," he warned. I looked up at him, taking in his flushed face and desperate eyes. "Good," I said, and increased my efforts. When he finally reached his peak, he said my name like it was the answer to every philosophical question he'd ever asked. I held him through the aftershocks, amazed by the power of giving someone such complete pleasure. Afterward, we held each other in the golden lamplight, skin damp with exertion, heart still racing. I traced patterns on his chest while he played with my hair, both of us processing what had just happened. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. In a few hours, I'd have to go home to David, pretend this night had never happened, continue planning a wedding that now felt like putting on someone else's clothes. There would be consequences, complications, impossible choices ahead. But right now, wrapped in Luca's arms, I felt more myself than I had in years. No regrets, I said firmly. He smiled and kissed the top of my head. Good. Because I meant what I said about authenticity. This, us, it's the most real thing I've felt in a long time. I knew what he meant. For all our philosophical discussions about existence and meaning, nothing had felt as genuine as this moment of connection, this choice to follow desire over duty. We made love twice more that night, each time discovering new ways to touch, new sounds to draw from each other, new depths of pleasure I hadn't known were possible. Luca approached my body like a text he wanted to understand completely, reading every response, memorizing every preference. By dawn, I was boneless with satisfaction, curled against his chest in the narrow space behind his desk. Reality was starting to creep in. I needed to leave, to get home before David woke up, to figure out what this night meant for my carefully planned future. But as I started to pull away, Luca caught my hand. "Hannah," he said seriously, "I need you to know this wasn't just physical for me. What I feel for you, it's everything. Your mind, your passion, the way you challenge me to think differently. I'm falling in love with you." His confession hit me like a shockwave. I'd been trying to tell myself this was just desire, just a moment of rebellion against my safe life. But looking into his eyes, I realized I was falling too. "Luca," I whispered, but he pressed a finger to my lips. "You don't have to say anything now," he said gently. "Just know that whatever happens next last night changed me. You changed me." I kissed his finger, then his palm, then his mouth, trying to pour everything I couldn't say into the connection between us. When I finally pulled away to get dressed, I felt like I was leaving part of myself behind. The walk home through the quiet Berkeley streets gave me time to think, but not enough. Time to solve the impossible equation my life had become. David was still sleeping when I slipped into our apartment, the ring on my finger feeling foreign and heavy. I stood in our bathroom, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was mussed, my lips still swollen from Luca's kisses, my skin glowing with the aftermath of true passion. I looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly loved, completely awakened. How was I supposed to go back to my old life after discovering what I'd been missing? The next few days passed in a haze of guilt and longing. David noticed nothing different, chatting about wedding plans and his work projects while I tried to focus on anything but the memory of Luca's hands on my skin. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, hoping it was him. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I arrived at the philosophy discussion early, my stomach full of nervous butterflies. When Luca walked in, our eyes met across the room, and I felt that familiar electric current pass between us. He looked as affected as I felt, slightly tired, distracted, like he'd been thinking about nothing but our night together. The discussion, that evening, was torture. Every time he spoke, I remembered the way his voice sounded when he whispered my name. Every gesture reminded me of how those hands had explored my body. I contributed little to the philosophical debate, too distracted by the very real man sitting across from me. When the session ended, I lingered again, but this time I wasn't alone. Sarah, one of the regular attendees, was deep in conversation with Luca about Sartre's views on bad faith. I waited, trying to look casual, but inside I was burning with the need to be alone with him again. Finally, Sarah gathered her things and left, calling goodnight over her shoulder. The moment we were alone, Luca was moving toward me, his eyes intense with the same hunger I felt. "I haven't been able to think about anything else," he said, stopping just inches away from me. "Neither have I admitted. "Come home with me tonight," he said urgently. "Not to my office, to my apartment. I want to wake up with you in my arms." The invitation terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. One night could be explained away as a moment of weakness, but this would be a choice, a deliberate step deeper into whatever we were becoming. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. His apartment was a reflection of his mind. Books everywhere, plants in the windows, music playing softly in the background. It felt warm and lived in, the opposite of the sterile perfection David and I had created in our place. "Wine?" he offered, but I shook my head. "I don't want anything to dull this," I said, moving closer to him. He cupped my face in his hands, looking at me with such tenderness it made my chest ache. "Are you sure about this? About us?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, and meant it. This time, when we came together, it was with the knowledge that we were choosing each other deliberately, fully. There was no urgency born of forbidden desire. Instead, there was a slow, thorough exploration of connection that went beyond physical pleasure. Luca made love to me like he was trying to show me something important about myself, about who I could be when I stopped hiding behind other people's expectations. Under his touch, I discovered reserves of passion I didn't know I possessed, depths of response that shocked and delighted me. "You're incredible," he whispered as I moved above him, finding a rhythm that had us both trembling with need. "I feel incredible with you. I gasped, lost in the sensation of being completely joined with him. We moved together like we'd been lovers. For years, intuitive and synchronized, each touch building on the last until we tumbled over the edge together, my name on his lips and his on mine. Afterward, we lay tangled in his sheets, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his dissertation, his dreams of teaching, his fear that academic life might be too small for the size of his ambitions. I told him about my art, the paintings I'd stopped making when I got serious with David, the creative part of myself I'd buried under the weight of practical concerns. "You should paint again," he said, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. I wouldn't even know where to start anymore. "With what you're feeling right now," he said simply, "paint this." I knew what he meant, this sense of being fully alive, completely present in my own skin. It had been so long since I'd felt inspired by anything, but lying there with him, I could almost see the colors I'd use, the brush strokes that might capture this feeling of awakening. We fell asleep wrapped around each other, and I woke to the sight of morning light streaming across his face, peaceful in sleep. For just a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to wake up like this every day, to build a life with someone who saw and celebrated every part of me. But reality crashed back as my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual sign-off felt like a slap. Love you. Automatic, expected, empty of the passion that had consumed me for the past 24 hours. I slipped out of Luca's bed and started getting dressed, trying not to wake him. But he stirred anyway, reaching for me sleepily. "Stay," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "I can't," I whispered, though every part of me wanted to crawl back into his warmth. He sat up, suddenly alert. "Hannah, we need to talk about this. About what happens now." I knew he was right, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. I was still processing the magnitude of what was happening to me, the way he'd cracked open something in my chest that I'd kept carefully sealed for years. "I need time," I said quietly. "How much time?" There was an edge to his voice now, uncertainty creeping in. "I don't know." I pulled on my shoes, avoiding his eyes. "This is complicated, Luca. My whole life is built around someone else. I can't just walk away from that overnight." "But you'll think about it? About us?" I looked at him then, sitting naked in his rumpled bed, hair messed from sleep and sex, eyes full of hope and fear. He was offering me everything. Love, passion, authenticity, a chance to discover who I really was when I stopped performing for other people. "I'll think about it," I promised, and kissed him goodbye. The next weeks were the most difficult of my life. I went through the motions of my regular routine, wedding planning with David, family dinners, work obligations, but inside I was splitting apart. Every conversation with David felt like acting, every discussion of our future like planning someone else's life. Meanwhile, Luca and I continued our Thursday night ritual, but now it was torture. We'd make eye contact across the philosophy circle, both of us remembering what it felt like to be skin to skin, heart to heart. The intellectual discussions took on new layers of meaning as we debated questions that applied directly to our situation. After 3 weeks of this exquisite agony, Luca cornered me after a particularly heated discussion about Sartre's concept of bad faith. "We can't keep doing this," he said urgently, pulling me into an empty classroom, "pretending we're just fellow philosophy enthusiasts when we both know what's really happening here." "What's really happening here?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "We're falling in love, have fallen in love, and you're torturing both of us by pretending we can go back to being strangers." He was right. The connection between us had only deepened over the weeks, every stolen glance and accidental touch adding to the mounting tension. "I'm engaged, Luca," I said weakly. "To someone who doesn't really know you," he shot back. "When was the last time David asked about your dreams? When has he ever challenged you to think differently about yourself? You're planning to marry a stranger, Hannah." His words hit too close to home. David and I had been together for 2 years, but I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a conversation that surprised me, the last time he'd looked at me with genuine curiosity about who I was becoming. "It's not that simple," I protested. "Isn't it?" Luca stepped closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and urgent. "You told me authenticity requires putting something real on the line. Well, this is it. This is your moment to choose who you really are instead of who you think you should be." I stared at him, this man who'd awakened parts of me I'd forgotten existed, who saw potential in me that I'd given up on. He was asking me to blow up my entire carefully constructed life for the possibility of something real and messy and uncertain. "I need more time," I said again, but the words felt hollow even to me. Luca's face fell. "How much more time, Hannah? Because I can't keep pretending I don't love you. I can't keep watching you plan a life with someone else when we both know you belong with me." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in my chest. I wanted to tell him he was right, that I loved him too, that I'd been thinking about him every moment since our first night together. But the weight of my obligations, the fear, of disappointing everyone who expected me to follow through on my engagement, held me back. "I'm sorry," I whispered and fled. That night, I sat across from David at dinner, watching him methodically eat his pasta while scrolling through emails on his phone. He'd barely looked at me since I'd sat down, hadn't asked about my day or shared anything meaningful about his own. "David," I said suddenly. He didn't look up from his phone. "Do you think we're happy?" "Sure," he said absently, still reading. "Why?" "I mean really happy, passionate, excited about our future together." That got his attention. He looked up with slight irritation. "Where is this coming from? We're fine, Hannah. We're stable, compatible, building something solid. Isn't that enough?" Enough. The word hung in the air like a judgment. Was I supposed to settle for enough when I'd discovered what it felt like? To be consumed by desire, understood completely, challenged to grow? What if it's not? I asked quietly. David set down his phone with an exasperated sigh. "Hannah, you're being dramatic. This is probably just pre-wedding nerves. Everyone goes through this." Maybe he was right. Maybe this thing with Luca was just a phase, a last rebellion before I settled into adult responsibility. Maybe mature love was supposed to be comfortable and predictable rather than earth-shaking. But as I looked across the table at the man I was supposed to marry in 3 months, I realized I felt nothing. No butterflies, no desire, no curiosity about his inner world. Just enough. The next Thursday, I almost didn't go to the philosophy group. I knew I couldn't handle seeing Luca again without making a decision I wasn't ready for, but something pulled me there anyway. Maybe hope, maybe masochism, maybe the desperate need to be in the same room as the person who'd shown me what it felt like to be truly alive. Luca was already there when I arrived, but he barely acknowledged me. Throughout the discussion, he kept his eyes carefully averted, participating in the philosophical debate with his usual passion, but directing none of that energy toward me. It hurt more than I'd expected. I realized I'd gotten used to being the focus of his intense attention, the recipient of those knowing looks and electric touches. Without that connection, I felt invisible, diminished. When the session ended, I lingered as usual, but this time, Luca packed up his things and headed for the door without a backward glance. "Luca," I called after him, panic rising in my chest. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I can't do this anymore, Hannah. I can't love someone who's too afraid to love me back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I watched him walk away, disappearing into the Berkeley night, and realized what I'd just lost. I drove home in a daze, David's ring feeling like a shackle around my finger. When I got to the apartment, I found him exactly where I'd left him. On the couch, laptop open, grading papers while the TV played in the background. "How was your little philosophy thing?" he asked without looking up. "Educational," I said quietly. And it had been. I'd learned that authenticity really did require putting something on the line. I'd learned that some connections are worth any risk. I'd learned that settling for enough wasn't actually enough at all. I'd also learned that sometimes you don't realize what you've chosen until it's too late. Have you ever had to choose between safety and passion? Between what you should want and what you actually need? Sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet. What would you have done in my place? Followed your head or your heart? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and want to know your take. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because, trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.